Hey guys, tonight we're stepping straight into the slow, ink-scented rhythm of a medieval scriptorium, your new office. If you can call it cold, echoing stone room and office. The air smells faintly of old parchment and beeswax, and outside, the world is still shadowy from the early dawn. You pull your woolen robe tighter, because the thick monastery walls hold onto the night's chill like an overzealous freezer. From somewhere down the hall, you hear the muffled toll of the bell, telling you it's time to start your day. And yes, you're about to spend the next 12 hours copying someone else's word by hand. So if you were hoping for a quick coffee run, sorry. Starbucks won't exist for about 700 years. You probably won't survive this, but hey, it'll be a good story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes to darkness pierced by the faintest flicker of a single candle stub. The straw mattress creaks as you sit up, every joint giving a small protest. You're not the only one awake. Across the narrow dormitory, another figure is tugging on a heavy brown habit, its sleeves frayed from years of use. This is Brother Guillaume, the fastest copyist in the monastery, though he swears it's just practice. Historians still argue whether speed ever matched accuracy in these places, or if fast just meant more mistakes per page. You pad across the cold flagstones, your bare feet protesting with every step. The corridor smells faintly of last night's wood smoke, and the distant echo of chanting from the chapel bleeds into your half-awake mind. This early hour has a strange magic. It's quiet, yes, but not empty. The monastery seems to breathe, as though the thick walls themselves have their own heartbeat. The scriptorium door groans open, revealing rows of desks set under arched windows so narrow they could double as arrow slits. Candles and oil lamps give the space a golden, shifting light. You take your place at your desk, your little wooden kingdom, and run your fingers over the grain. The surface bears faint grooves and ink stains from decades of scribes before you. It's a reminder that in here, time isn't measured in hours. It's measured in pages. The first order of business, warming up your hands. You blow into your cupped palms, rubbing them together until you can feel life creeping back into your fingers. It's a low-tech version of stretching before exercise, because trust me, after 6 hours of writing, your hand will feel like it belongs to a particularly creaky antique shop. You glance at the tools laid out in front of you, quills trimmed to perfect angles, an inkwell dark as midnight, and a small pile of rough parchment sheets that smell faintly of animal hide, because, well, that's exactly what they are. A tiny ceramic cup of water sits nearby, ready to thin the ink when it gets too thick. And off to the side, there's the ever-important sand shaker for drying ink so it won't smudge. In the Middle Ages, this sand was sometimes just ground pumice or a crushed eggshell. It worked, but also had the annoying habit of finding its way into every fold of your robe. Brother Guillaume coughs quietly in the corner, already bent over his first sheet. You catch the gentle scratch, scratch, scratch of his quill. It's a hypnotic sound, one of those noises that seem to pull you into the present moment, even as your mind tries to wander. You think about how in your old life, the one with central heating and Wi-Fi, you'd never have imagined finding peace in repetitive tasks. Now, though, there's something soothing about it. Through the high, narrow windows, the first threads of dawn slip inside. The light is pale and thin, not yet strong enough to compete with the flicker of the candles. Outside, you hear the faint call of a rooster from the monastery farm. There's also the faint rustle of wings, pigeons living in the rafters. You've given one of them a name, Sir Beaks-a-Lot, though you'd never admit that to anyone. Today's work waits, a section of psalms for a richly decorated volume that, rumor has it, will be gifted to a noble family. That means more than just neat writing. You'll also need to leave space for the illuminator to add gold leaf and elaborate initials. You are the guidelines lightly scratched into the parchment. They're straight enough, though one looks a little wobbly. You tell yourself it's artistic variation. As you dip your quill into the ink for the first time, the smell hits you, sharp, almost metallic. It comes from the oak gall ink, made by mixing tannin-rich oak galls with iron salts. This recipe has been used for centuries, and some surviving manuscripts still hold their color after 800 years, which is kind of humbling when you think about it. Your work today might literally outlast you by many lifetimes. No pressure. The first letters glide onto the page in careful strokes. Your hand moves slowly, deliberately, each motion a little ritual. The trick is finding the right balance. Press too hard and the quill splays. Too light and the ink fades. Somewhere in the middle is perfection. At least, that's what you aim for. The scriptorium smells now of ink, beeswax, and the faint scent of wet wool from everyone's robes. Somewhere down the hall, the kitchen clatter begins. Pots being set over the fire for the midday meal. But that's hours away. For now, it's you, the parchment, and the steady rhythm of your hand. It's funny. You sometimes think of this place like a beehive. Every scribe here is a worker bee, focused on their tiny portion of a larger whole. No one finishes a manuscript alone. It's always the work of many hands. And like bees, you're mostly quiet unless something disrupts the flow. Like the time Brother Hugo sneezed so violently he knocked over an entire inkwell. The blot took 3 days to scrape and re-prepare. By the time the dawn light grows stronger, you're already deep in the day's first passage. Outside, the world is waking, but in here, it's always the same hour. Scratch, dip, write, breathe. You glance up briefly, stretching your neck, and the movement makes the candle flame tremble. Shadows dance across the parchment, and for a second, you imagine the letters themselves are alive, shifting into place while you're not looking. Your stomach growls softly, but breakfast is still a long way off. You push the thought aside and focus on the letters again. The quill's tip glides, leaving a clean, dark line. You take a quiet breath, and the world narrows to just you and the page. The bell tolls faintly in the courtyard, marking an hour you've stopped bothering to count. You're already in that quiet groove where your hand knows emotions and your mind drifts just enough to keep you from going stir-crazy. But before you can write anything meaningful, you need more ink. Not just any ink, your ink. The personal batch you've been brewing since last week, because, as any good copyist will tell you, every scribe swears their mixture flows better than anyone else's. You gather your tools and make your way toward the little workbench tucked in a corner of the scriptorium. There's no rushing this part. Good ink is like good bread, and you don't cut corners unless you enjoy the taste of failure. Before you lies a small pile of oak galls, those strange, round growths found on oak trees where wasps have laid their eggs. If you've never seen one, imagine a tiny medieval stress ball, except it's solid and will stain your hands black for the rest of the week if you're careless. The mortar is cold against your palm as you start crushing the galls. The air fills with a faintly sour, woody smell. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's the smell of work, of something ancient and dependable. Historians still argue whether the oak gall ink formula changed much from the Roman Empire to the late Middle Ages, or whether everyone was just stubbornly using the same recipe, because it worked. Once the galls are ground into a coarse powder, you pour in a measured splash of rainwater collected from a barrel in the courtyard. The liquid darkens almost instantly, like a storm cloud forming in miniature. Next comes the iron sulfate, the thing that will give your ink that deep, near-black hue prized for centuries. The crystals dissolve slowly, swirling in little eddies. You stir with the tip of a wooden rod, hearing the faint scrape against the bottom of the bowl. As the ink begins to take shape, You warm your hands over a nearby brazier. The stone walls may keep out the wind, but they also seem to hoard every drop of cold like a miser with his gold. Your fingers are stiff from the chill, and you've learned the hard way that stiff fingers make shaky lines. While you work, a faint creak of the door draws your attention. Brother Henri slips in, cradling his own ink batch like it's a newborn child. He gives you a nod and sets it carefully on his desk. Henry's ink always has a reddish undertone. Something he swears is intentional. You're not convinced. Rumor has it he once tried to stretch a batch by adding wine instead of water, resulting in an ink that smelled faintly of last night's feast for weeks. The first shafts of sunlight now touch the high shelves, catching the edges of stacked parchment sheets and making them glow like pale gold. It's a brief moment, gone in seconds, but it makes the room feel warmer. You glance toward the window. Just enough sky is visible to see a bird wheel past, probably a crow from the fields beyond. For a second, you envy it. Then you remember that crows don't get steady meals or warm wool robes, so maybe you'll keep your desk, with your ink mixed to the right consistency. You pour it carefully into a small glazed pot. The surface gleams, almost mirror-like. There's a moment of satisfaction in knowing this ink will carry someone's words for centuries, assuming no one spills it. You set aside to cool slightly before use, as hot ink can run too freely and ruin a page faster than you can say, "Blessed be the scribe." Back at your desk, you dip the quill into the fresh batch. The first test strokes on the scrap of parchment are smooth, almost effortless. There's a sweet spot where the ink is dark but not too thick, where the quill tip glides like a skate on fresh ice. You hit that spot now, and a small smile tugs at your lips. The rhythm returns. Dip, stroke, lift, breathe. You catch Brother Guillaume peering over, probably checking if your new batch outperforms his. You resist the urge to wink. Instead, you hunch a little, pretending to be too absorbed in your work to notice. Halfway through a line, a pigeon coos loudly from the rafters. You pause, glancing up at the dim shapes overhead. Sir Beaks-a-Lot and his companions are awake, their feathers puffed against the cold. You wonder what they think of you. Strange featherless creatures, scratching at animal skin all day. Do they think you're harmless? Or are they plotting to knock a candle over just for fun? You'll never know, but you keep an eye on them anyway. The minutes blur into something slower, softer. The scriptorium hums quietly with the sound of a dozen quills in motion, the faint scrape of chairs, the occasional cough. The air smells faintly metallic now from the ink making, mingling with the beeswax from the candles. Every so often, you hold the page at an angle to catch the light, making sure the ink sits evenly. On rare occasions, the sunlight through the windows will turn the wet letters into tiny silver mirrors before they dry. You catch one of those moments now, and for no real reason, it makes you happy. In your mind, you picture this page years from now, handled by hands you'll never meet, read by eyes long after yours are closed. You wonder if they'll notice the care in the strokes, the steadiness of the lines. Or maybe they'll just see Psalm 23 and move on. Either way, it's worth doing well. By the time you finish the current sheet, your ink pot is still half full, which feels like wealth in this little corner of the world. You set the page aside to dry, sprinkle it lightly with sand, and take a deep breath. The day is still young, the work endless, but at least the ink will hold. Your quill's tip has been softening all morning, the once crisp strokes now feathering at the edges like an old paintbrush. You know the signs. It's time for surgery. You reach with a little knife at your side, the one every scribe carries. Not for defense, unless you count offending against messy letters, but for trimming quills back into perfect writing tools. The goose feather is long and elegant, the shaft pale against your ink-stained fingertips. You hold it up to the light from a narrow window, tilting it so the natural curve matches your hand. The trick is to keep the tip angled just right, slicing away thin curls of keratin with the kind of precision you'd expect from someone carving a miniature cathedral. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes sharpened quills daily or only when desperate, but your aching fingers know the truth. A bad point will ruin you faster than bad ink. The first slice is delicate, shaving away the worn edge. Then comes a careful split of the nib, a tiny incision right down the middle to hold the ink. The sound is soft, like tearing cloth in miniature. You test it on a scrap of parchment. Still too broad. Another trim, another test, while you work. You can't help remembering the first time you tried this, years ago, when the tip snapped clean off and flew into Brother Pierre's bowl of lentils. He ate around it without comment, which you've always considered either saintly patience or sheer indifference. When you're satisfied, you run the blade lightly over the outer edges to smooth them, then polish the shaft against your sleeve. The quill gleams faintly, ready for another stretch of steady work. You dip it into the ink, and it rewards you instantly with a clean, dark line. Around you, other scribes are doing the same. Tiny surgeries at their desks, each quill a patient in need of careful treatment. Brother Guillaume hums under his breath as he works, some half-remembered him that wanders between keys. The parchment in front of you is waiting, its faint guideline scored by a lead stylus. Each sheet is expensive enough to make you wince if you think too hard about it. Made from calfskin or sheepskin, it's been scraped, soaked, and stretched until it's smooth enough for your quill to glide without snagging. And yet, there's always the occasional flaw, an uneven patch, a faint scar on a hide. Some scribes avoid those spots. Others work around them like puzzle pieces. You prefer to treat them as a challenge. The day's text is a theological commentary dense enough to drown in. You copy each letter carefully, thinking about how few people will ever actually read these words closely. It's more about preservation than pleasure. Still, there's a strange comfort in knowing you're part of that chain, one of countless hands keeping these words alive. Your fingers ache after only a few lines, so you set the quill down and flex them. Outside, the faint sound of a cart rattles past the monastery gate. A dog barks once, sharply, before falling silent again. The world beyond feels far away, close enough to hear, but distant enough to seem almost unreal. On your desk, a second quill waits as backup. You carved it from a swan feather a month ago, and it has a softer feel, better for broad, decorative strokes. You think about using it for the next illuminated capital, maybe adding a tiny flourish if no one's looking. After all, who's going to notice if the letter A happens to have a subtle spiral that looks suspiciously like a snail shell? You dip the goose quill again, and the steady rhythm returns. Scratch, pause, lift, dip. Every so often, you blot the nib against a piece of cloth to keep the ink from flooding. The cloth is already a tapestry of past mistakes and overflows, each blot a tiny reminder of human fallibility. A small shadow flits across the page, Sir Beaks-a-Lot, making another sweep through the rafters. You glance up just in time to see him settling near the far end, watching you with what can only be described as mild judgment. You tell yourself not to take it personally. The air is warmer now as the sun rises higher, casting sharper beams through the windows. Dust motes drift lazily in the light, each one a tiny, glittering distraction. You resist the urge to watch them too long. Focus is everything here, because one slip, a flick of ink, a crooked line, can mean hours of repair work. At midday, you'll be given a short break, maybe a chance to stretch your legs in the cloister. For now, the pages before you are all that matter. Each line you complete feels like adding a single stone to a cathedral wall. Slow, deliberate, necessary. No one builds a cathedral in a day, and no one finishes a manuscript that way either. As the quill glides, you marvel again at its simplicity. A feather, a blade, and a steady hand. No gears, no wires, no magic, just a quiet, stubborn work of turning thought into mark. And maybe, just maybe, that's why it lasts. Your eyes are starting to glaze over from the endless neat lines of Latin when you feel the itch, the irresistible urge to stray, just a little from the rules. It's not rebellion, exactly. It's just, well, you've been staring at the same solemn phrases for hours, and the margins are sitting there wide and empty, like an open invitation. You glance around. Brother Guillaume is buried in his work, brow furrowed. Brother Henri has leaned so far over his page you can't even see his face, just the curve of his hood. No one's looking. That's all the encouragement you need. Carefully, you dip your quill and start a small sketch in corner of the margin. Nothing big, just a quick curl that becomes a shelled snail. With a few more strokes, the snail is suddenly being chased by a very tiny knight, wielding a sword much too large for him. The absurdity makes you grin. It's not entirely without precedent. Historians still argue whether the odd doodles in surviving manuscripts, monkeys playing bagpipes, rabbits jousting, fish wearing crowns, were done out of boredom, satire, or some symbolic meaning now lost to time. You like to think they were just fun. A secret handshake between copyists centuries apart. Your snail and knight scene grows. A few strokes for grass, a hint of a castle wall behind them. You keep it subtle, though no bright pigments this time. Just ink. So it won't stand out unless someone is really looking. The abbot, for instance, is not someone you want really looking. Once, years ago, you saw Brother Hugo hauled into the abbot's office for illuminating a manuscript's capital O with a cat chasing a mouse. The abbot claimed it was frivolous and a waste of materials. Hugo claimed it was morale-boosting. Neither side budged, but Hugo's next commission was mysteriously delayed for months. You finish the scene and lean back, admiring it for just a second. It's good. Simple, balanced, tucked neatly between the lines without touching the sacred text. It feels like leaving a little time capsule of your personality for some future reader. Maybe they'll smile the same way you are now. The quill returns to its steady rhythm. Words fill the page again, but now the work feels lighter somehow. The margin is your little secret, a reminder that even in a room devoted to silence and precision, you can sneak in a wink. The smell of ink and parchment is stronger now, mingling with the faint aroma of bread baking in the kitchen. Your stomach takes notice immediately. Lunch isn't far off, but the clock in your head, if you can call the bell schedule that, says you still have at least half an hour. You distract yourself by focusing on the decorative flourishes of the next illuminated capital. Brother Henri lets out a small sigh somewhere to your left. You glance over and see him staring at his own margin, clearly weighing whether to add something. A moment later, he dips his quill and draws a single tiny leaf curling around a letter. It's barely there, but you catch his eye and nod. Solidarity. In the rafters, Sir Beaks-a-Lot shifts and sends a little rain of dust motes down into the golden candlelight. One lands on your parchment, right next to the knight's helmet. You blow gently, sending it tumbling away, and try not to think about how close that was to becoming a blot. The room is still silent, except for the scratch of quills. Sometimes the rhythm of it makes you think of rain on a rooftop. Steady, soothing, and strangely hypnotic. You wonder that's part why some scribes add doodles, to break the trance before they nod off and drag a line of ink across half a psalm. A few pages over, you spot an older sheet, one you finished weeks ago, dry and stacked neatly. You remember leaving a tiny drawing of a bird tucked into the tail of a letter Q on that one. The thought makes you grin again. It's like scattering breadcrumbs to the forest of your work, just in case you, or someone, wants to follow the trail later. Finally, the bell rings for the midday break. You set your quill carefully in its holder, sand the page, and close the inkwell. As you stretch, you give the snail and knight one last look. It's perfect, quiet, harmless, and yours. And with that, you head for the cloister, already imagining what other little mischief might fit into tomorrow's margins. The cloister walk after lunch has done its job. Your legs feel less like brittle sticks, and your head is clearer. But the moment you step back into the scriptorium, the hush wraps around you again. It's not the heavy, uncomfortable kind of silence, though. It's a living thing, a companion that sits beside you as you work. You slide into your seat, adjust the angle of the parchment, and pick up your quill. The scratch of other scribes' pens greets you like the soft clink of teacups in a distant cafe. In a strange way, the rhythm is reassuring. Dip, scratch, lift, breathe. You spend enough time here to know that each scribe has their own tempo. Brother Guillaume's is a brisk staccato, while Brother Henry's is deliberate and almost hesitant. You sit somewhere in the middle, slow enough to avoid mistakes, but quick enough to keep from drowning in a single sentence. It's funny how the mind tunes into little background noises when you spend hours in a single room. A faint call from the far desk, the whisper of a robe sleeve brushing wood, the occasional creak of the building itself, like the monastery is stretching in its old age. And above it all, the pigeons, Sir Beaks-a-Lot and his merry band, softly cooing in the rafters, adding a bass note to the score. Historians still argue whether the silence of Scriptoria was strictly enforced or simply a natural byproduct of concentration. Some records suggest monasteries had rules about no unnecessary chatter, while others mention quiet conversation being allowed in low voices. You know from experience that a quick whisper over a blot or a particularly tricky abbreviation won't summon divine wrath, unless the abbot happens to be walking by. Your eyes drift momentarily toward the window, where a sliver of sky is visible. Clouds slide slowly past, like parchment pages being turned by an unseen hand. The sunlight through the slit window shifts as they move, sometimes making the ink glisten like tiny pools of oil, sometimes casting the whole desk in shadow. Back on the page, the letters march neatly across the line. You settle into that half-dream state where the act of writing becomes automatic and your thoughts wander somewhere just beyond the edges of the work. You think about the journey of this manuscript, the parchment prepared by the tannery, the words dictated centuries ago, the countless hands it will pass through after yours. A sneeze explodes from somewhere to your right, shattering the stillness for a moment. You glance over to see Brother Hugo rubbing his nose and muttering a prayer for forgiveness, as if sneezing were a mortal sin. The rest of the room quickly returns to its gentle rhythm. The smell in here is its own quiet signature, a mix of beeswax, iron gall, ink, and the faint tang of old leather from the binding stacked in the corner. If the silence is a scriptorium's voice, the scent is its memory. It clings to your robe, follows you to supper, and lingers in your hair long after you've left. Sometimes, though, the silence can be deceptive. Once, you remember, a mouse darted across the far end of the room, tiny claws tapping like raindrops on the stone floor. No one said a word, but every head turned to follow its path as it vanished behind a stack of vellum. For the rest of the day, there was an undercurrent of expectation. Would it return? Would it gnaw a hole in someone's work? It didn't, but the memory still makes you smile. Your own word for the afternoon is more straightforward. A clean copy of a sermon, with minimal decoration required. It's the sort of text that lets your hand take the lead while your mind drifts. You wonder idly if the monks who will read this in the future will actually listen to its meaning, or just nod politely and go back to their gardens. A faint gust sneaks into the window, and for a moment the candle flame dances wildly. Shadows ripple across the walls, bending over desks like curious ghosts. You steady the candle with your hand, cupped around the base, until the flame settles again. The scratch of your quill blends with the others into a single, quiet harmony. It's a music only you and the others in this room will hear, and it's gone the moment it's made. There's something comforting in that, a fleeting sound that leaves behind a lasting mark. You reach the end of the page, sprinkle it lightly with sand, and set it aside. Another sheet done. Another step in the long march of this manuscript's making. The silence swells again, wrapping around you like a woolen cloak, and you pick up the next blank page. You push open the heavy wooden door and step inside the scriptorium. The air feels cooler here, as if the thick walls themselves are holding back the world's noise and keeping this little room frozen in perpetual stillness. The only sounds are the faint scratching of quills and the occasional muffled cough. It's oddly comforting, like being inside a church where the saints have swapped incense or ink. The scriptorium isn't a grand hall, more like a long, narrow chamber with a row of desks pressed against the windows. Those windows, by the way, are covered with parchment panes instead of glass, which means the light they let in is soft and milky, like someone smeared the sun with cream. You find your desk. It's not yours in the modern, ergonomic office sense, more temporarily occupied until Brother Stefan gets tired of your slouching. The bench is a plank of wood, without a hint of cushioning. The desk a tilted board to keep your manuscript from sliding into your lap. You run your fingers along the grooves carved by decades of scribes before you. Each dent tells a silent story. An accidental jab of a quill, a moment of boredom spent doodling. Maybe the quiet frustration of a copied page ruined by one stray blot of ink. Here's your toolkit. A quill, freshly cut this morning from a goose feather, a small knife for shaping a nib, a horn of ink that smells faintly metallic, a pumice stone for smoothing rough parchment, and a little box of powdered chalk to prevent smudging. Every item is simple, functional, and probably older than you. Historians still argue whether quills from swans or geese were more prestigious. Goose quills are common, sure, but swan quills have this aristocratic aura that makes you feel slightly fancier, even if you're just writing amen for the 50th time today. You lean forward, hands braced on the desk, and take in the quiet choreography of the room. On your left, a younger scribe bends so close to his page you wonder if he's trying to breathe life into the words. On your right, an older monk adjusts his spectacles, a rare and prized possession, and peers down through lenses so thick they could double as shields. The scent of vellum, parchment, and slightly sour ink fills your nostrils. It's an oddly addictive smell. You might not want to wear it as cologne, but as far as work environments go, it's got character. The windows don't let in much light, so a few strategically placed oil lamps cast a warm, flickering glow over the desks. Shadows dance over the manuscripts, making the letters look alive, almost as if they might crawl off the page when you're not looking. The flicker isn't exactly great for your eyesight. You'll be squinting by mid-morning, but it does make the whole place feel like a tiny magical cave where words are mined instead of gold. You settle into your bench and adjust your posture. Or, more honestly, you slump forward until Brother Stefan clears his throat from across the room, which somehow straightens your spine faster than any royal command. The work here is repetitive, yes, but not mindless. You have to pay attention to every letter, every space, every minuscule dot. A single slip could ruin a page, and parchment isn't cheap. One mistake, and you're scraping the surface with your knife. Try to erase the error without leaving a scar big enough to shame your future grandchildren. There's a kind of unspoken hierarchy here. The most skilled scribes get to copy important theological works or the occasional illuminated manuscript, the kind with fancy gold leaf and illustrations of saints who all look suspiciously alike. The novices like you, you're on Psalms duty. Over and over, you write the same lines until they're tattooed in your brain. The monotony has a strange side effect. You start noticing details you never caught before. You see patterns in the way certain letters curve, the rhythm of spaces between words. You almost feel like the page is breathing with you. Halfway through the morning, Brother Stefan brings around a small pot of red pigment. You'll use it for rubrics, those decorative headings that tell the reader where one section ends and another begins. It's a small touch of color, in an otherwise monochrome world. You dip your quill into the pigment, careful not to overload it, and draw the first sweeping letter. The red glows in the lamplight like fresh blood, but in a holy way, you tell yourself, because otherwise it's a bit creepy. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some scribes, when bored or feeling mischievous, hid tiny drawings in the margins. Little rabbits playing trumpets, knights battling snails, that sort of thing. Historians still argue whether these were inside jokes, moral lessons, or just proof that medieval boredom was deadly to productivity. You glance down at your own page and resist the urge to draw a tiny dragon chasing a monk. It's too early in your career for that kind of rebellion. The hours pass in that peculiar way they do when your hands are busy, but your mind drifts. You think about lunch. You think about the weather outside. You think about whether the abbey's cat is napping in the sunbeam by the cloister. Then you refocus on the next word, the next letter, the next curve of ink. By midday, your back aches. Your fingers are smudged with black and red, and your quill is starting to fray. You set it down, stretch your arms, and look around the scriptorium. No one speaks, but the camaraderie is there, woven into the shared rhythm of scratching pens and rustling parchment. It's quiet work, yes, but you're part of a centuries-old tradition, guarding words against the erosion of time. And if that isn't noble, well, at least it beats digging ditches in the rain. A church bell tolls faintly somewhere beyond the walls, but you hardly notice it. So deep are you in the rhythm of brush and ink. The sound travels differently here in the scriptorium, muffled, softened by stone and parchment, like it's been told to whisper. The morning light has shifted from gold to a cooler, more serious white, and your little corner feels like a pocket of time that no one outside can touch. You're working on a particularly tricky illumination now, one that has a miniature saint with a halo, that needs to be just the right shade of burnished gold. Too much shine, and it'll look gaudy. Too little, and it'll lose its sacred glow. You mix your colors with the care you'd normally reserve for handling a live hedgehog, gingerly, thoughtfully, and with an awareness that sudden movements will end badly. The gold leaf you're about to apply has a mind of its own, curling at the edges, sticking to your fingertips, and pretending it's lighter than air. If you breathe too hard, you'll find it fluttering onto your neighbor's desk, which would lead to that awkward moment of, is this yours? Or have I just stolen a halo? Historians still argue whether medieval artists used certain botanical extracts to enhance the brilliance of gold leaf, or whether it was just a layering technique itself. You, right now, are leaning toward the maybe they whispered to it theory, because you swear this stuff listens better when you're calm. While your hands are busy, your ears catch a low hum from Brother Matthew, who's seated 2 desks away. He always hums when he's copying legal texts, as if a little tune will soften the crushing boredom of royal decrees. You, on the other hand, have the luxury of working on Psalms today, a collection that offers the occasional poetic flourish to break the monotony. Every so often, a stray mote of dust drifts down onto your wet paint. You're armed for this, of course, with the world's tiniest brush, which you wield like a surgical instrument. Flick, gone. There's a strange satisfaction in saving a miniature scene from such an undignified fate. In the quiet, your mind wanders. You think about the people who will one day open this book. Maybe it'll be a monk 100 years from now, tracing your letters with a finger, wondering what sort of life you lived. Maybe it'll be a wealthy merchant's child, sneaking a look at the pages instead of doing their own chores. The idea that your work could outlive you is both comforting and a little spooky, like leaving a note in a bottle for someone who hasn't been born yet. Your quill makes a faint scratching as you outline the figure's robes, dipping into ultramarine pigment made from lapis lazuli, which, rumor has it, came all the way from mines in Afghanistan. It's more expensive than gold, and you use it sparingly, aware that every stroke could be worth a small chicken in trade. A quirky tidbit drifts through your head. Some scribes were known to keep a tally of how much lapis they used, not for accounting, but for bragging rights. Oh, yes, this manuscript has 17 full strokes of ultramarine. We were feeling extravagant. You catch yourself leaning too close to the page again, your breath almost fogging the ink. Straightening up, you roll your shoulders and take in the room. Brother Thomas has paused to rub his eyes. Sister Agnes is holding a sheet up to the light, inspecting for smudges like a detective looking for fingerprints. The smell of drying parchment mingles with the faint tang of egg yolk tempera, and somewhere, someone's stomach growls softly. It's nearing the hour when you'll take a short break, but you want to finish the Saint's halo first. You apply the final touch of gold, press it gently into place, and pull back to see the light catch on it. It glows just enough to make you smile. For a second, you forget the stiffness in your back, the ink stains on your fingers, and the monotony of copying the same letters for hours. You just see beauty, and you know, deep down, that someone someday will see it too. You set your tools down carefully, brush crumbs of gold from your desk, and close your eyes for a brief moment. Even here in this small, silent corner of the world, you feel part of something vast, bigger than the monastery, bigger than the century, maybe even bigger than history itself. You feel it first in your fingertips, the slight, sticky drag of ink that doesn't quite dry as fast in the damp autumn air. The seasons aren't just something you glance at from the monastery courtyard. They're baked into every heartbeat of your work in the scriptorium. The candles burn quicker in winter. The quills dull faster in summer's heat, and your schedule, whether you like it or not, dances to the rhythm of the sun. Morning light in June spills generously through the narrow windows, making the black ink gleam on vellum, without the need for a dozen candles. But come December, you're hunched close at the page, shadow wrestling the text, the low golden light from tallow lamps pooling on the margins. You'd think winter would make the work cozy, warm room good company. But remember, medieval heating isn't exactly central. Your toes curl inside thick wool socks, and you keep telling yourself that numb fingers make fewer mistakes. Historians still argue whether copyists preferred winter for fewer distractions or dreaded it for the sheer chill that seemed to seep into bones of both scribes and manuscripts. The work pace shifts too. Harvest season means fewer monks at the desks, more out in the fields lending a hand. You don't escape it entirely. You're expected to help haul sheaves or gather apples, but they do tend to guard your hands like delicate instruments. A copyist with blister, Brother Arnold says, is like a bell without a clapper. You suspect he's just trying to avoid extra farm duty himself. Quirky detail. In certain monasteries, it was tradition to hang sprigs of rosemary in winter to keep the cold demons away from the ink pots. Whether the demons were literal or just a poetic jab at frostbite, you can't say, but it does make the scriptorium smell like someone's baking bread somewhere. The seasonal changes even creep into the manuscripts themselves. The vellum stretches or contracts depending on humidity. The ink changes tone. Autumn batches tending toward richer browns. Spring batches drying lighter. Later readers might assume this was a stylistic choice, when really, you were just fighting with nature. And, if you're honest, sometimes losing. By spring, the work feels lighter. The birds outside seem to sing along to the scratching of your quill, and you start getting distracted by patches of sunlight creeping across your desk. You take longer to complete each page, not from laziness, you assure yourself, but from savoring the rare warmth. And yes, maybe also from nodding off in the sunbeam. If you thought the hardest part of being a scribe was making a manuscript, you haven't yet tried keeping one alive. These books are like living things. They stretch, breathe, and, regrettably, fall apart if you so much as glare at them the wrong way. The vellum is the first to show its moods. In damp weather, it swells slightly, pages sticking together at the edges. In dry heat, it tightens until it crackles faintly when turned. You can almost hear it sigh in winter, a sound halfway between parchment shifting and the groan of old knees. As for the ink, even the best iron gall mixture fades under sunlight, shifting from sharp black to a soft brown that looks romantic, but is in reality just a slow chemical surrender of tannins to time. Bindings? Oh, bindings are where the real heartbreak lives. Leather straps dry and stiffen if they're not oiled. Glue flakes into dusty little corpses, and the cords inside the spine fray like worn bootlaces. Some books eventually warp so badly that they never close quite right again, their pages bowing outward as if they've been quietly arguing with gravity for decades. And yet, there's a strange dignity in it. The tiny tears at the corners, the faint thumb smudges in the margins, even the occasional candle wax drip. All are quiet signatures of every person who ever handled the book. A pristine manuscript might impress visitors, but a well-worn one hums with life. Practical repairs become part of your craft. You learn to stitch a loose quire back into place, to patch a vellum hole with a thin sliver of scrap, to mix a fresh glue batch that won't sour. There's a whole secret language in these repairs. Some scribes leave little colored thread markers. Others use decorative stitches along a damaged margin, so future readers will notice and smile instead of frown. In the scriptorium, the most treasured manuscripts aren't the flawless ones. They're the survivors. You might copy a text 20 times in your life, but the one you rebound after a fire, clean the soot, pages flattened under warm boards for weeks, that one feels like saving a life. And when you set it back on the shelf, slightly crooked but whole, you know it will outlast you, carrying both the text and the touch of your hands into a century you'll never see. The first chill of dawn still clings to the air as you return to your bench, the pale light filtering into the narrow window, slit like a cautious visitor. The candle on your desk is now just a stub, its wax frozen mid-drip, hardened into tiny waves. You stretch your fingers, those endlessly patient, endlessly cramped tools of your trade, and feel the stiffness from yesterday's marathon session still lurking in your knuckles. The world beyond the scriptorium might already be stirring with the sounds of carts, hoofbeats, and the occasional shout. But here, in your little rectangle of wooden desk and parchment, it's just you, your quill, and the next intricate border you promise to finish before the week is out. Borders are the icing on the cake, the part where even a tired copyist can flex a bit of flair. The main text? That's for accuracy, solemnity. And don't sneeze now, you'll ruin the page. But borders? Borders are your playground. You dip your quill into the black ink, just to anchor the basic lines. But already you're imagining the vines that will curl and twist into each other like lazy cats stretching in the sun. And somewhere in there, between the ivy leaves and the tiny curling tendrils, you'll sneak in a small bird or a rabbit that might, if someone looks closely centuries from now, seem to wink at them. Historical fact. In many illuminated manuscripts, copyists and illuminators would include small whimsical drawings, marginalia, that had nothing to do with the main text. Knights fighting snails, monkeys playing bagpipes, cats in priestly robes. You've seen a few of these yourself when repairing older volumes, and you can't resist joining that secret, centuries-long joke. The abbot may frown if he notices, but it's unlikely he'll be peering at every last vine you draw. Your pigments wait for you in little shells, each carefully prepared yesterday, so you wouldn't lose time today. The green is malachite ground to a fine powder, mixed with egg white to keep it smooth. The red, a brilliant vermilion, catches a light in a way that makes you think of fresh berries in summer. Historians still argue whether some of the most brilliant blues of the Middle Ages, made from lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, were really worth their incredible expense. But you know that when you get your hands on that pigment, it's like working with solidified sky. You begin with a fine black outline, moving with the kind of slowness that would drive anyone else to madness. 1 millimeter at a time, you draw the frame that will hold the whole scene together. Then, a leaf here, A spiral there. A bird with a ridiculous hat. No, that's too much. Just a jaunty tilt to its head will do. You glance at the little window again, not to check the time, but to let your eyes rest from the close focus. In this moment, you're reminded that no one will ever fully know who made these borders. Your name won't be on the page. Maybe someone centuries from now will recognize your style, but more likely, you'll be a ghost hand, a quiet collaborator with the past. That anonymity is strangely freeing. You can draw a smiling fox in the margin without wondering if it fits your public image. Because your public image doesn't exist. It's just a fox and you. A knock on the door. Soft, the kind that's more of a don't panic than an actual request for attention. Brother Hugo enters, carrying a small pot of gold leaf and a brush, so thin it might have been made from a single strand of hair. For your border, he says, as if it's the most natural gift in the world. You nod, and for a second, you think he might have noticed the little rabbit you hid under the ivy. He doesn't comment, just leaves the gold and disappears again, like some sort of monastic Santa Claus. You prepare the gesso, glue, and chalk mixed into a paste, and with the tiniest touch, lay it onto the places you want to shine. It's a delicate business. Too much, and the gold will flake off in a year. Too little, and it won't stick at all. Then, with a breath you didn't realize you were holding, you press the wafer-thin sheet of gold leaf onto the sticky patch. It clings like it's been waiting for this moment its whole life. You burnish it gently, and suddenly your border doesn't just frame the page. It radiates from it. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval manuscripts, copyists drew fantastical beasts in the borders to protect the text, almost like magical bodyguards for words. You wonder if your rabbit could be counted as one of those guardians. It's not fierce, unless you count the way it's currently nibbling a carrot that's almost as big as its head. But maybe it's fierce in spirit. The rhythm takes you. Draw, breathe, dip the brush, add a dash of green, a touch of gold, pull back, admire, then lean in again. Hours pass without your noticing, until the light shifts and you realize you've missed a midday meal. Your stomach growls, but you're reluctant to break the spell. Borders, after all, have to be finished while the vision is still fresh in your mind. Finally, when your hand starts trembling, not from nerves but from sheer muscle fatigue, you set down the quill. The border is alive now, twining and curling and glowing in the soft afternoon light. You lean back and feel a quiet satisfaction. The words on the page might outlive kingdoms, but your little rabbit in the vines? That's yours, tucked away in the eternal margins. You ease into the day's work again. Quill in hand, the scent of old parchment already wrapping itself around your senses like a wool cloak. The words on the page are foreign to most, but to you, they are friends you greet daily. Still, today is not just about words. Today is about color, about breathing life into the dark ink outlines with pigments, so bright they can make a king's robe look faded. The inkwell sits nearby, but you've also got your precious little paint pots lined up like soldiers at inspection. Crimson from ground cinnabar, deep blues from lapis lazuli hauled over mountains, and that pale green you still suspect is just ground copper pretending to be fancy. It's easy to forget how rare these colors are. People in your century don't exactly stroll into an art supply store with a coupon. Some of your pigments came from across the known world, traded by merchants who swear they fought off pirates to deliver them. Historians still argue whether certain colors, like the deepest ultramarine, were reserved strictly for depictions of the Virgin Mary, or whether a daring scribe could sneak it into a dragon's wing just for fun. You're not planning anything quite so rebellious, but you might test the limits with a slightly too rich gold halo. You dip your fine brush, made from squirrel hair, naturally, because no other bristle gives the right glide, into a puddle of crushed mineral and egg white. The paint shimmers wetly, catching the flicker from the oil lamp. Your breath slows as you make the first stroke, tracing the edge of a letter you've already inked in a precise Gothic hand. This is a part of the job where time forgets you exist. Hours slide past in silence, except for the occasional drip of water in a bucket by the door and the muted thump of footsteps from a hallway. A quirky little tidbit. Some scribes, especially in monasteries, believe bright pigments could actually help illuminate the soul of the reader, almost like medieval mood lighting. You can't say for sure whether that's true, but you have noticed how a gold leaf border catches the eye in a way no plain ink ever could. And yes, gold leaf, your favorite headache. Gold leaf comes in whisper-thin sheets that stick to everything except where you want them to. You have to dab just enough sticky gesso onto the parchment, wait until it's almost, but not completely dry, and then lay the sheet down. If you sneeze at the wrong moment, congratulations, you've just gilded your own nose. The shimmering effect, though, is worth every frustrating moment. When the candlelight hits it just right, it's like the page itself is glowing from within. Your workspace is a mix of discipline and chaos. Bowls of pigment, small knives for scraping away mistakes, and spare bits of parchment are scattered among the pages in progress. You've learned the hard way to keep the cats out. They have an uncanny ability to walk across a half-finished page and leave a perfect trail of paw prints in vermilion. And yet, a certain part of you enjoys the mess. It's proof of the living act of creation, not just sterile repetition. You pause to stretch your hands, flexing your cramped fingers. The oil lamp hisses faintly as you trim the wick, careful not to drip tallow onto the page. Outside, winter sunlight filters through the narrow window slit, casting a pale beam over your desk. It feels like the whole world has narrowed to this square of light and the delicate lines you're painting within it. You've heard people say that scribes live quiet lives, but quiet isn't quite the word. It's more like concentrated. Every stroke matters, and there's no undo button here. Another historical fact you often think about. In some scriptoria, there was a strict division of labor. One person wrote the text, another did the illuminations, and yet another applied gold leaf. Here, though, you're the entire department. That means you can decide on a whim to make a certain vine pattern curl a little more dramatically or sneak a tiny bird into the corner of a capital letter. Will anyone notice? Maybe not consciously, but you like to think your touch makes the book warmer, more human. Hours later, you sit back to admire the finished illumination. The page looks alive. The deep blues, the gold shimmer, the delicate outlines all dancing together like stained glass captured on parchment. Your shoulders ache. Your fingers are speckled with color, and you've somehow gotten a smear of green on your cheek. You'll discover that later, probably when the cook gives you a funny look at supper. For now, you slide the page into a protective folder, brush away a stray crumb of gold leaf, and allow yourself the quiet satisfaction of knowing that centuries from now, someone might open this book and see exactly what you saw today. And maybe, just maybe, they'll feel the same sense of wonder. The day starts before the sun even thinks about showing its face, which you've come to realize is both a blessing and a mild punishment. In the pre-dawn dimness, the scriptorium feels different, quieter, even by monastery standards. You shuffle in, clutching a small loaf of yesterday's bread like it's a priceless artifact, and set it down beside your tools. The bread is more than breakfast. It's your insurance against a morning slump, because copying manuscripts isn't exactly the kind of work you can do while half asleep without consequences. A single misplaced stroke can turn a man into arm, which, although funny in hindsight, would earn you an uncomfortably long lecture about attention to divine detail. Today's task is particularly ambitious. Illuminating a psalter page so rich with gold leaf, it could probably blind a modestly lit room. You've already stretched the parchment until it's smoother than a monk's tonsured head, and now it's time for the delicate dance of gilding. You dip a tiny brush into the gesso, That strange mixture of plaster, glue, and a drop of garlic juice, yes, garlic. Supposedly it helps adhesion, though historians still argue whether this was necessity or just a bizarre culinary crossover. The smell alone could keep away any evil spirits or any socially inclined neighbors. The gold leaf is absurdly thin, thinner than a whisper, and you have to hold your breath as you place it, because even one stray sigh could send it fluttering away like a moth in candlelight. You press it gently, feeling the slight give under your fingertip through the parchment. It's not flashy yet, but once you burnish it, that little square will blaze like a tiny sunrise in the middle of the page. It's satisfying in a way only a book copyist would truly appreciate. Like watching your slow, meticulous work transform into something almost supernatural. While the gold sets, you turn to the pigments. Your blue comes from lapis lazuli, imported all the way from Afghanistan. This stone is so precious, it's worth more than gold itself, which makes your careful grinding feel like handling the crown jewels. The sound of pestle on stone is rhythmic, almost meditative, and you let your mind wander just enough to notice the cool bite of the morning air on your cheeks. That air will warm soon enough. Scriptoria have a habit of turning into ovens by midday, but for now it feels crisp, almost bracing. As you begin painting the intricate vine patterns along the page margin, you think about the absurdity of your role. You spend days, sometimes weeks, on a single page that most people will glance at for a heartbeat before turning it. And yet, there's a stubborn pride in knowing that without people like you, those same people wouldn't have anything to read at all. Well, unless they're into oral storytelling, but even then, someone has to keep the tales consistent. Otherwise, David slays Goliath could easily morph into David makes Goliath a nice cup of tea after a few retellings. Halfway through, your stomach grumbles. You break the seal on your bread, its crust still giving a satisfying crack, even though it's a day old. One of the younger monks passes by, eyeing the loaf with the kind of longing normally reserved for relics of saints. You tear off a piece and hand it to him, because generosity is good for the soul, and also because you know he might sneak you extra lamp oil later when your candle burns low. Your mind drifts to the little quirks of life in the scriptorium. There's Brother Thomas, who swears by holding his quill at an exact 45-degree angle, as if any deviation might invite divine disapproval. There's Brother Matthew, who refuses to illuminate anything with dragons because he insists they're morally confusing creatures. And then there's you, silently amused at how much passion can be packed into debates about ink recipes and margin wits. Historians still argue whether medieval scribes saw themselves as mere copyists or as true artists, but watching your colleagues, you'd wager at least half believe they were on par with Michelangelo, minus the ceiling work. By midday, the gold leaf has taken on a luster that could rival the sun streaming through the narrow window slits. You carefully scrape away the excess, revealing perfect lines that seem to glow with their own light. It's moments like this when you feel the tiniest thrill. Your work is more than preservation. It's quiet creation. You might be copying someone else's words, but your hand, your flourishes, your choice of pigments, they all leave a mark that's uniquely yours. As the bell tolls for midday meal, you clean your brushes, each one rinsed until it's as pristine as the day it was first bound. You pack away the gold leaf into its little box like tucking a child into bed, making sure not a speck escapes. Then you roll your shoulders, feeling that familiar ache settle in, the one that reminds you you've been hunched over a desk for hours, but also that you spent those hours doing something strangely timeless. The Psalter page rests before you, half complete, shimmering like a promise. You'll be back after the meal to finish the vine work, maybe add a little surprise. A tiny bird tucked into the foliage, visible only to the sharpest eyes. Because in this quiet, deliberate life, sometimes the greatest joy comes from knowing you've hidden a secret beauty in plain sight. For most people, a life is measured in children, houses, or coin earned. For a scribe, It is measured in the slow accumulation of pages, a strange sort of immortality stitched into parchment. You might begin your apprenticeship thinking you are merely copying words, but by the end, you realize you've been binding yourself into history, line by line. A scribe's legacy isn't always obvious. There's no crowd to applaud when you finish a manuscript, no festival in your honor when your handwriting improves, no bronze statue to commemorate the day you finally mastered the perfect gilded initial. Your work is quiet, often anonymous, and meant to blend seamlessly with the centuries before and after you. And yet, somewhere long after you're gone, someone may lift a book you made, trace a letter with their fingertip, and think, this was done by a steady hand. The manuscripts you leave behind will outlive your bones. They will travel farther than you ever will, carry across borders, sold between collectors, hidden in monasteries, smuggled through wars, rescued from fires, and forgotten in dusty attics. They will endure floods and famine, the gnawing of mice and the fading of ink, and still, somehow, they will speak in your voice centuries after your lips last moved. A scribe's touch is more intimate than people realize. Every curve of a letter is a fingerprint. The way you dot your I, the particular tilt of your G, the flourish at the end of the sentence, these are as personal as a signature. If you worked in a scriptorium, perhaps your style blended into the uniformity required, but there would still be small rebellions, a marginal doodle on a slow afternoon, a note to yourself in a barely visible script, a slightly bolder ink where your nib was newly trimmed. These are the quiet fingerprints you leave for the observant to find. You may never know the fate of your books. Some will be revered, placed behind glass in grand libraries. Others will be broken apart. Pages sold individually for their illuminations. Still others will be read until they collapse, their bindings failing after centuries of service. It is strange, knowing that your life's work will be both cherished and discarded, often with no distinction between the two. But legacy is not about control, it's about endurance. As long as a single page survives, you survive. As long as one person pauses to admire the flow of a letter or the shimmer of gold leaf, you are still in conversation with the world. The ink may fade, but the impression remains, as much in the minds of readers as in the grooves left in the parchment by your pen. And if there's a small comfort in this quiet craft, it's that you were never really working for yourself. The manuscripts are for the readers you will never meet, the ones who will carry your words, or someone else's, filtered through your hands, into futures you cannot imagine. That is a strange, beautiful paradox of the scribe's life. Your work belongs to eternity, but eternity will never know your name. The scriptorium at night was a different world. By day, its high windows caught the sun, flooding the long tables with light, so clear you could see the texture of every fiber in the parchment. But once the sun dipped behind the cloister wall, that vast room became a sea of flickering shadows. The oil lamps were lit one by one, each wick catching with a tiny hiss and flare, until the air was thick with the scent of burning olive oil. To work at night was not common. Oil was costly, and the flame's heat warped the parchment if held too close. But there were evenings when a commission's deadline loomed, or when the weather outside made the room's dim glow feel like the center of the world. On such nights, the scriptorium became a realm apart, time dissolving into the rhythm of pens scratching across stretched skin. The lamps themselves were varied. Some were simple clay dishes, chipped at the rim. Others were elegant bronze vessels with long spouts, their surfaces engraved with curling leaves. Each cast a slightly different hue of light, golden, amber, sometimes tinged with a faint green, and together they made the manuscripts on the table shimmer as if the letters were alive. The illumination in the margins, birds mid-flight, saints with halos, dragons winding between vines, took on otherworldly brilliance under the trembling flame. Outside, the cloister was silent save for the occasional sigh of wind through the arcades. Inside, the sounds were hushed but constant. The scribe beside you shifting on his bench, the soft tap of a penknife trimming a quill, the faint crackle of drying ink. Every so often, someone would pause to warm stiff fingers over a lamp, careful not to smudge the page. The light made faces seem carved from gold and shadow, eyes reflecting fire. In the center of the long hall stood the master scribe's desk. His lamp was the largest, a heavy brass piece shaped like a lion, with his mouth serving as a wick's opening. Its glow seemed almost regal, spilling across a stack of half-bound folios. The master himself was a stooped figure in a thick wool robe, his hands steady despite the late hour. He did not often speak, but when he did, his voice carried the authority of someone who had copied more words than most men would read in a lifetime. Working at night brought a peculiar intimacy between scribes. Without the bustle of daytime duties, there was space for quiet conversation. Sometimes, a young apprentice might whisper a question about a difficult abbreviation, or an older scribe would share a tip for keeping ink from freezing on a cold winter night. At other times, no words passed at all, yet the shared labor, the bending over pages together, the synchronized breathing and writing, wove a kind of fellowship as enduring as the books themselves. The lamps made the hours slippery. It was easy to lose sense of time, to fall into a trance where the only measure was the slow advance of the text. Some scribes welcomed that state. Others found it dangerous, for fatigue could blur lines and invite errors. A single misplaced letter could ruin a page's symmetry, forcing hours of work to be scraped away and rewritten. Still, there was a magic in that nocturnal focus, the world outside shrinking to nothing but the small pool of light before you. When the night's work ended, it did so abruptly. One by one, lamps were snuffed, the sudden darkness swallowing the room in stages. The warm scent of extinguished wicks lingered in the air, mingling with the faint tang of iron gall ink. The pages were stacked neatly, weights placed atop them to keep them flat. Quills were cleaned and laid to rest, penknives folded shut. Stepping outside into the cool night, you carried with you the afterimage of the lamps. 1,000 small suns burned into your eyes. In that moment, the stars overhead seemed like their counterparts, scattered across a greater vault, reminding you that your work, however small, was part of a longer light. The manuscripts you had labored over would keep their own glow centuries hence, whenever someone turned their pages in another pool of lamplit night. If there is a universal constant in the life of a scribe, it is this. Sooner or later, you will spill ink on something you really, really wish you hadn't. It is not a matter of skill, care, or experience. It is an immutable law, as inevitable as sunrise, as final as gravity. The ink we use is no tame creature. Iron gall ink bites into parchment like a wolf into bone. It stains, it scars. It becomes part of the page's very fibers. Once spilled, it blooms in spreading black blossoms, the edges feathering outward in an ugly halo. You can try to blot it, yes, but that usually leaves a mottled bruise, a permanent ghost of the disaster. And heaven help you if it splashes across more than one page. Then you have a blot that tells a story, a mistake repeated in stereo. Every scribe develops their own peculiar method of damage control. Brother Lucian swears by pressing a warm sandbag onto the blot to lift some of the pigment. Sister Matilda insists on a mix of vinegar and tears, her own, preferably, since she says they're more effective. I've had the most luck with scraping, a delicate operation with a sharp edge of penknife, shaving the surface fibers just enough to remove the top layer of stain, without leaving a bald patch that makes the page feel wrong to the fingers. But the worst spills aren't just about the parchment. They're about pride. You can spend hours crafting a perfect, intricate letter only to have the bottle tip. Perhaps nudged by your own sleeve, perhaps by the phantom vengeance of some old rival, and watch as your work drowns in an expanding sea of black. The sound you make in that moment is not entirely human. It isn't just your own pages, either. In the scriptorium, proximity is both a blessing and a curse. The long, narrow desks place you elbow to elbow with your fellow scribes, and a clumsy movement can send ink skittering across a shared workspace. The aftermath of such an accident is an unspoken trial of friendship. The victim stares at you with silent, simmering gaze, and you begin calculating exactly how many days of labor it will take to copy their ruined pages as penance. Some ink disasters, though, take on a sort of legendary status. Years ago, Brother Pascal dropped an entire jar onto the floor, where it burst and sent rivulets of black running between the flagstones. For weeks, every step in that part of the room made a faint sticky sound, and the splotches never entirely faded. They just became part of the scriptorium's geography, like little lakes on a map, each one silently reminding us to keep the bottle's lid firmly in place. And here's the strangest thing. Over time, you start to love those mistakes. The pages with tiny blots become the ones you remember most vividly. A faint smear across the margin becomes not a flaw, but a fingerprint of the day it was written. The scribe's hands trembling from cold, or hurrying to finish before vespers, or startled by a sudden sneeze from the novice across the room. In the end, the ink's mischief becomes part of the manuscript's life. The accidents that once filled you with despair will someday make another scribe smile, tracing the blot with fingertip and thinking, here, too, the work was human. There's a peculiar injustice in the fact that dust, which weighs almost nothing, which seems to appear out of thin air, can be one of the deadliest enemies of a manuscript. Ink may stain, fire may scorch, water may warp, but dust works with slow, quiet malice. It creeps in at night, settling invisibly over the shelves and lecterns, whispering into fibers of parchment, dulling their color and abrading them grain by grain. The scriptorium has a weekly dusting rota, but weekly is a fiction. In truth, dust falls every hour from the open rafters, from our own clothing, from the very walls that hold us. It collects in corners like small, gray conspiracies, waiting for a careless elbow or the breath of an opening door to launch it into the air in a swirling, shimmering cloud. And once it lands on a fresh sheet of vellum, it mixes with wet ink in ugly, gritty smudges that no amount of scraping will fix. Every scribe develops their own arsenal in this war. Some favor the soft squirrel hair brush, sweeping gently over the page before beginning work, as if dust could be coaxed away by kindness. Others, the more militant types, wield cloths dampened ever so slightly with vinegar, which both cleans and leaves a faint, sharp scent that seems to discourage the dust from returning too quickly. Brother Laurent swears by a ridiculous contraption of goose feathers bound together, which he flourishes with such drama that one suspects he enjoys performance as much as a result. The real danger comes when dust meets moisture. In the winter, when the scriptorium's breath clouds the air, dust absorbs dampness and transforms into a thin, invisible paste that works its way into bindings. Over decades, this weakens the stitching until the spine sighs and gives way. We have entire shelves of resting books, tomes whose covers have slumped into themselves like tired faces, and if you press your nose close, you can smell the faint tang of their long battle with the dust. Some dust carries history. If you look closely at the layer on the highest beams, where no broom has reached in a century, you'll find mote of ancient candle soot, fragments of dried pollen from flowers carried in by monks long dead, and the fine ash of distant hearth fires. It's humbling, in a way, to think that the dust beneath your fingernails could be older than the manuscript you're copying. We try to fight it, but deep down, I think we all know it's a losing battle. Dust has more patience than any monk. It will wait until our hands grow too unsteady, until the brush slips, until the scriptorium falls silent. And then it will reclaim the pages, the shelves, the desks, until the whole place feels like an abandoned chapel, the air thick with the quiet weight of centuries. Still, tomorrow morning, I'll take up my brush again. I'll sweep the desk, flick the edges of the parchment, and watch the motes dance in the sunbeam that falls through the high window. For a few moments, I'll believe I'm winning. And perhaps that's enough. If dust is our quiet enemy, ink is our constant companion. And like most companions kept too close for too long, it can be both comfort and curse. The smell of ink is the smell of work, of time measured in slow lines across a page. It is earthy, metallic, and faintly sweet all at once, the scent clinging to the fingertips even after hours of washing. Each pot in the scriptorium holds more than just pigment. It holds a memory of the scribe who mixed it, the proportions of soot to water, the vinegar steeping time, the handful of oak galls crushed under the pestle. No two inks are identical, even when made from the same recipe. Brother Aldrich's black is deep and velvety, sinking into the vellum like nightfall. Mine is a touch warmer, the iron gall solution leaning toward a faint brown that reveals itself only after years of aging. There is a ritual to dipping the quill. First, the gentle swirl to catch the ink evenly along the nib, then the slow rise, watching the bead cling to the point, trembling in readiness. If the bead is too large, it will blot. Too small, and the letter will pale before it is complete. We are taught to listen. Yes, listen, for the sound the quill makes against the page. A healthy, balanced dip produces a faint, steady whisper, like a moth's wings against linen. Too wet and it hisses. Too dry and it scratches. Ink stains are inevitable. The cuffs of my robe bear a constellation of them, each a small record of distraction or haste. The others joke that you can read a scribe's temperament in his stains. The wide, splattered marks of Brother Laurent betrays impatience. The neat, precise dots on Sister Isabel's sleeves suggest a nature so cautious that even her accidents are orderly. There is also the matter of ink aging. Freshly written words glisten for a heartbeat before settling into the page, and for that moment they seem alive, as though they might rearrange themselves if you looked away. Over the years, the letters shift tone, some deepening into a dignified darkness, others fading to the sepia of a dried leaf. This is not decay, but transformation, as if the ink is slowly speaking in a different voice, one more fitting to its age. In the long afternoons, when the sun warms the high windows and the air is thick with the scent of oak galls and soot, I find myself inhaling without meaning to. It's as though the ink itself is a kind of anchor, holding me to the present moment. Outside, seasons turn and kingdoms rise and fall, but here the ink remains steady, the same patient mixture that will outlive us all. There is an old superstition in the scriptorium. Spill a drop of ink on a blank page, and you must finish it with a verse, lest the book be cursed with silence. I keep such a page at the back of my own ledger, dotted with small, awkward poems, each one born of an accident, each one a quiet reminder that not all flaws must be erased. When I die, I hope they will bury me with a quill still stained at the tip. Let the worms taste the iron gall. Let the soil take the soot. Perhaps in time, the ink will seep into the ground, and some distant root will drink it, carry my words upward into leaf and blossom. It is a foolish thought, but it pleases me to imagine that the scent of ink might one day drift again into the air, long after my own hands are stilled. Light in the scriptorium is a fragile, living thing. The sun serves us well in the mornings, when its white glow spills across the long desks and makes the gold leaf dance in tiny sparks. But as the day stretches into evening, we must coax light into being with fire, and fire, unlike the sun, demands a constant, almost parental care. The candles are not the bright, steady flames of noble halls. Ours are beeswax, uneven and slow burning, each poured and rolled by the hands of the lay brothers who keep the abbey supplied. Beeswax carries its own perfume, faint but unmistakable, a warm, honeyed breath that clings to the air long after the wick is lit. In winter, when the windows are sealed against the wind, the scent weaves with that of the ink and parchment until the entire scriptorium smells like a deep, slow memory. Lighting the candles is an unspoken ritual. At the hour of vespers, Brother Mateo takes the taper and moves down the rows, touching each wick to life. The moment the flame catches, there's a faint hiss, followed by a trembling brightness that pushes the shadows back a cautious step. The shadows never leave entirely. They huddle in the corners and under the tables, watching. A candle's light is deceptive. It gives enough to work by, but not enough to reveal the whole truth of a page. Gold leaf gleams more warmly by candlelight. The reds deepen into wine. The blues thicken into midnight. Even plain ink seems to breathe differently. Its strokes richer and more secretive. Some scribes prefer this. They say candlelight makes the work look more like the world it will enter. Imperfect, dim, and full of quiet depth. Yet candlelight also breeds mistakes. Shadows lengthen and shift with the smallest movement, turning letters into shapes you thought you knew but now cannot quite trust. A tired I will mistake a C for an E, a T for an L. I have learned to keep a steady rhythm, to lean neither too close nor too far, for even a flame's small flicker can betray a hand that forgets itself. There's a danger in fire, too. We keep sand nearby in shallow bowls, not for the ink, but for the day a sleeve or page might brush too close to a flame. Every scribe knows the story of the great ashing, a single toppled candle, and 3 years of work reduced to blackened curls of parchment. The abbot says the fire was a judgment from God. The scribes say it was simply Brother Henry's elbow. But beyond the caution and the care, there is a comfort in working by candlelight. The flame breathes in rhythm with the scriptorium, steady, slow, unhurried. Outside, the night takes shape, but here the world is small. The page, the pen, the pool of gold light, and the gentle crackle as wax surrenders to heat. Sometimes I pause, quill suspended, to watch the way the light sways with a draft from the window. The shadows bend and stretch like silent dancers, retreating and advancing in time with the flame. It makes me think that perhaps the scriptorium is alive in ways we cannot measure, that each page, each stroke, is made not just by our hands, but by the shared labor wax, wick, fire, and shadow. And when the last candle gutters, when the final line is laid down, the quills are rinsed, the room falls into a darkness so complete that for a moment you wonder if the work ever happened at all, or it was all a dream made of flickering light and whispered ink. Every manuscript carries two voices. The first is the one meant to be read, the grand, deliberate voice of the text itself, flowing in ordered lines from margin to margin. The second is quieter, hesitant, and often unintended, the voice of the margins. Margins are not merely empty space. They are the breathing room of a page, the silence that allows the main text to sing. Yet here, in the scriptorium, they are rarely silent for long. Scribal hands have always been unable to resist their invitation. A small flourish in the corner, a curling vine twining up the side of the column, a grotesque face peeking from behind a capital letter. These are the whispers, the secret conversations between the scribe and the page. Some are practical whispers, corrections to misspelling, a small nota bene for the reader, or a reference to another passage in another book. These are the bones of scholarship, the scaffolding that keeps the main text upright. But others are personal in a way that no abbot would approve. Once, while restoring a page in the Psalms, I found a thin, careful note in the outer margin. Brother Amalric writes slower than a thawing river. No one had dared scrape it away. Perhaps it amused too many hands to destroy. In another manuscript, an even smaller script, squeezed into the lower corner, read, "God forgive me, I am so cold I can no longer feel the quill." The ink was a paler brown than the main text, a winter's ink thinned by frost. The margins also hold strange creatures. Rabbits chasing snails, knights jousting with giant fish, monks wrestling with dragons whose teeth are suspiciously shaped like a baker's. No one truly knows why these images creep in alongside Holy Writ. Some say they are lessons disguised as play. others that they're the scribe's rebellion against long hours of piety and precision. I think they are simply the places where the hand forgets its discipline and begins to dream. There's a danger to these dreams. The abbot insists that margins are for nothing but proportional space. Decorum and emptiness, he calls it. To fill them with idle thoughts or idle drawings is, in his view, a lapse in devotion. But the older scribes smile at this, for they know that the margins are what keep a book alive. Without them, a manuscript is perfect but mute. With them, it is flawed but breathing. The whispers are not only visual. In the faint scratches between the lines, you can sometimes find a ghost of words never meant to be inked. The faint indents of a scribe testing his quill, or a sentence begun and abandoned before it reached the page. The parchment remembers even what the ink does not. I have begun, in my own work, to tend the margins like a hidden garden, a thin tendril of ivy curling toward the top of the page, a small bird perching on the end of a line. These are not distractions from the text. They are companions to it, as stars are companions to the moon. I do not know if anyone will notice, but that is the nature of a whisper. It exists for the one who listens closely enough to hear. And so, when the page is finished, I step back and look not only at the words I have written, but at the spaces I have kept. In the stillness of the scriptorium, with only the rustle of parchment for company, I swear I can hear them. The soft, sly laughter of every scribe who ever dared leave their shadow in the margins. In the scriptorium, silence is never truly silent. The untrained ear hears nothing. But if you sit long enough, the stillness blooms into 1,000 small voices. First, there is a quill. Its song is not steady but alive, a soft, fibrous whisper as the nib glides over parchment, the faint rasp when the point meets a rougher grain. Sometimes it stutters, catches, and must be coaxed forward again, like a shy animal crossing a path. I have learned to recognize each scribe by the rhythm of their quill. Brother Amalric writes in long, unbroken sighs. Brother Loron in brisk, clipped phrases, as if each word is a nail to be driven home. Then comes the parchment itself. It creaks under the slightest touch, like an old house settling in the night. When turned, it releases a breath, dry, airy, almost imperceptible, the sound of centuries thinned into a single moment. Ink has its own language. The scratch of a quill dipping into the inkwell, the faint tap on the rim to shake off excess, the quiet gurgle when the pot is tilted too far. The smell rises with the sound, sharp iron, damp gall, the faint sweetness of gum arabic, a sense so bound to the work that I can smell it even in my dreams. Between these sounds, there is the music of human habit, a soft cough swallowed quickly, the creak of a stool as a scribe shifts his weight, the occasional sigh of someone who has counted the same line 3 times and still cannot make the letters behave. In winter, there is a gentle chink of a small brazier being fed another coal, and over it all, the great clock of the place, the tolling of the bell from the tower above, marking the hours. Its low, deliberate voice breaks the work like a blade through wax, sending all hands briefly to prayer before turning them to the page. Yet the strangest sound of all is the one I hear when the day is ending. The scribes leave, the light fades, and the room returns to shadow. That is when the completed pages seem to hum, not with any earthly noise, but with a presence, as if the words themselves remember the voices that brought them into being. It is a choir of quiet things, a music that needs no listener, for it is written into the very air of the scriptorium. Before a book has a spine to rest upon, before its leaves are married and clothed in leather, it has a scent that belongs to no finished thing. It is the smell of becoming. It begins with the skin, the stretched, scraped parchment that still holds the ghost of the animal it once was. When damp, it carries a faint, grassy musk from the meadows where that creature grazed. When dry, it smells almost like baked bread, with a whisper of smoke, as though it remembers the warmth of the sun on its back. Then there is the ink, dark as midnight, sharp as the first bite of winter air. The iron gall brew has an austerity to it, the metallic tang of iron mingling with the sour fruitiness of oak galls, softened by the resinous sweetness of gum arabic. When fresh, it bites the nose. When aged in the pot, it mellows into something woody and almost wine-like. The pigments for illuminations add their own secret perfumes. Ground lapis lazuli smells faintly of dust and cold stone. Vermilion carries a subtle mineral sweetness, like rain on red clay. Gold leaf has no scent of its own, but the bowl, that soft, reddish clay that holds it, gives off a warm, earthen aroma when rubbed between fingers. Even the glue has a voice in this perfume. High glue, heated slowly in a small pot, releases a smell somewhere between damp wool and boiled broth, humble, homely, yet vital. It clings to the rafters long after the pot has cooled. The scriptorium itself gathers all these scents like a tapestry woven from air. The benches smell faintly of beeswax polish and old wood. The rushes on the floor carry the aroma of crushed herbs scattered to keep vermin away. Lavender, thyme, sometimes rosemary if it is in season. When I walk to the room before the work begins, I breathe in this mingling of raw materials, skin, ink, stone, clay, glue, wood, and herb, and I know I am standing in the heart of a transformation. These smells will change as the hours pass, just as the scattered sheets will take on meaning. By the end, they will no longer smell like parts, but like a single united whole. And yet, I love most of this early perfume, the smell of possibility, the fragrance of a book before it is a book. The making of a book is a marriage not only of materials, but of light and shadow. Without the right light, the hand falters, the colors dull, the ink betrays its own unevenness. The day's work begins and ends according to the sun's slow arc across the sky. In the early morning, light seeps into the scriptorium like a pale blessing. It is soft, cool, and almost hesitant, touching the edges of the desk before finding the vellum. This is the hour when lines are ruled, the pale graphite or lead point needing only the gentlest illumination to be true. The air is still, the light steady, and the scratch of stylus against skin echoes in the hush. As the sun rises, it spills with greater force through the high, narrow windows. This is when color is ground, mixed, and laid, pigments coming alive in the flood of brilliance. The deep blue of lapis turns to a tiny sky in the mortar. The crimson of cochineal swells like a heart just after the bellows of breath. Every brushstroke catches fire in this fullness of light, and gold leaf dazzles so bright it seems to float above the page. Midday light is the sternest. It reveals every flaw without mercy. The tremor of a line, the uneven pooling of ink, the minute stray fiber caught beneath a brushstroke. The scribe learns to be humble before it, for this light strips away illusions and demands precision. Sometimes, when the summer heat presses in, a thin cloth is hung across the window to soften its glare, lending the room the pale gold of honey rather than the white blaze of noon. By afternoon, the light begins to angle, growing warmer, thicker, as though it carries the scent of the outside world. Sun-warmed grass, resin from distant pines. This is the time for patient work. Fine hatching, delicate ornament, the curling stems of vines and the margins. The angled light casts gentle shadows that make even the smallest details rise like relief sculpture from the page. Then, at last, the day's light begins to retreat. The work slows, not from weariness but from reverence, as if the scribe and illuminator both sense they are holding on to the last precious minutes before the sun withdraws entirely. The gold catches a final, molten glow, and the pigments seem to sigh into the page, accepting their place. When the light is gone, the tools are set aside. No candle or oil lamp can truly replace the sun for this work. They flicker, distort, and tire the eyes. The scriptorium sleeps until the next dawn, waiting for the return of the true guide, the light that makes the hand sure. To those who have never stepped into a scriptorium, it may seem a place of silence, but for those who dwell within it day after day, It's quiet as alive with a secret orchestra, a symphony woven from the smallest of sounds, each carrying its own rhythm, timbre, and weight. The first note is always the same. The faint creak of wood as benches and stools are drawn close to the long work tables. It is not loud, yet in the dawn stillness it feels ceremonial, the clearing of a throat before the chant begins. Then comes a rustle of vellum sheets being lifted, their texture like the dry flutter of moth wings. Some sheets sigh as they are turned. Others give a tiny, sharp snap, as though impatient to be marked. The ruling stylus makes its entrance next, a dry whisper, like a fingertip tracing frost on a window pane. Across the room, a quill is being trimmed. Its crisp, deliberate scritch of the penknife is followed by a faint breath to blow away the feather's curls. Soon, the true heart of the music begins, the scratch of ink quills moving over prepared skin. It is a sound both steady and varied, sometimes a gentle murmur, sometimes a staccato flurry as the scribe hurries to catch the thread of the sentence before it slips away. From the painter's corner comes a different cadence, the light tap of a brush rinsed against a small pot's rim, the swirl of pigment and water, the soft, almost inaudible kiss of bristles meeting vellum. Gold leaf work adds its own delicate percussion, the faint THFFF of breath over the adhesive, the dry, papery crackle as a wafer of gold settles into place, followed by the smooth rub of a burnisher's stone. The room's score is never perfectly uninterrupted. Outside, a bird will trill through the open high window. Somewhere down the corridor, a door will close with a hollow thud. In winter, the pop of wood in the brazier joins the composition. And always, there's the occasional cough, or the low murmur of two scribes debating the shape of a letter in some ancient hand. As the day lengthens, the music slows. The rhythm of quills falters into thoughtful pauses. Brushes rest longer in their cups. Near the day's end, the scraping sound of penknives cleaning points signals the closing bars. Then the final sound, the quiet folding of cloths over pigments, the sigh of a book's cover closing, marks the silence's return, as complete as when the day began. In this silence, one realizes the music of the scriptorium is not made to be heard by the world outside. It is a private liturgy, a devotion in sound, known only to those whose days are spent in service to the page. If the music of the scriptorium belongs to the ears, then its perfume belongs to the soul. To step into this place is to breathe in centuries, not in the dust and decay that haunt abandoned shelves, but in a living tapestry of scents, each layer telling its own story. The bass note is vellum itself, that unmistakable aroma of prepared skin, both earthy and clean, with faint sweetness that seems to hover between parchment and warm bread. It is not the smell of death, but transformation, animal made into something that can hold words for hundreds of years. In summer, the scent deepens, warmed by sunlight slipping to the high windows. In winter, it takes on a cooler, more papery tone, like linen left in the frost. Then there is the ink, sharp, mineral, and a little bitter, carrying whispers of oak galls and iron salts. Freshly mixed, it has a tang that pricks the nose, as if it could stain the air as easily as the page. After it dries, the bite softens, leaving a faint metallic ghost that lingers when a book is opened even decades later. For those who have written for years, this smell is memory itself, the scent that accompanies the shaping of every thought. From the illuminator's corner, a different fragrance drifts. Pigments ground into powder release their own perfumes, some faintly floral, like crushed petals, others chalky, others metallic. The egg yolk used for tempera gives off a faint, rich warmth, and the gum arabic lends a resinous sweetness, like sap and sun. Occasionally, a scribe mixing vermilion will scent the air with a breath of sulfur, sharp and fleeting as a struck match. The gold leaf has almost no smell of its own, yet alters the air in subtler ways. The faint gluey tang of the adhesive, the almost imperceptible aroma of leather burnishers warmed in the hand. These mingle with the dry, comforting odor of wooden writing desks, the faint spice of beeswax candles, and always the human warmth of bodies working side by side, cloaked in wool and patience. As the hours pass, the fragrances shift. In the morning, there is freshness, new ink, open pot of pigment, the sharper scent of cut quills. By afternoon, the smells have blended into a quiet harmony, softened by time and motion. And at day's end, when the shutters close and the brazier cools, the air settles into something rich, dark, and calm, the very smell of words waiting to be read. Long after one leaves the scriptorium, the perfume of the page clings to hands, to hair, even to memory. It is a reminder that these works are not only to be seen or read, but to be breathed in, as if every letter and every stroke of paint still exhales the life that made it. If the smell of the scriptorium lingers in the mind, the touch of its pages lingers in the body. To hold one of these manuscripts is to feel the slow labor of many hands condensed into a single object, a quiet weight that speaks without words. The first impression is always temperature. In winter, the vellum feels cool at the fingertips, like river stone. In summer, it warms quickly under the skin, becoming almost alive, pliant, and yielding. Run a finger across the margin, and you can sense the grain, fine, faint ridges in the skin's natural texture, made smoother by scraping, yet never erased entirely. Each page carries the ghost of the creature it once was, a silent reminder of the transformation from life to language. The edges of the sheets are soft and feathery where the knife trimmed them, but the writing surface is taut, resilient. Some folios are thin and delicate, flexing under the lightest breath. Others are thick and almost leathery, making a dry rustle when turned. In well-used volumes, the corners curl slightly from years of being lifted. In untouched ones, they remain sharp as a pressed leaf. There is a subtle topography to the written word. Ink raises the surface ever so slightly, a relief that can be felt more than seen. In places where the scribe's pen paused too long, the ink pools, leaving a minute bump beneath the fingertip. Gold leaf, once applied, changes everything. It is smooth but not flat, catching not only the light but the pad of the finger, a tiny island of cool metal amid the warm page. Sometimes the texture tells a secret. On certain folios, you might feel the faint depressions where guidelines were pricked and ruled, or where a stylus scored the page before the first stroke of ink. The marks are invisible unless the light catches them. Yet to the hand, they are unmistakable. Even the rare mistakes, where a letter was scraped away with a knife, leave a scar you can feel. Slightly thinner, slightly rougher, a palimpsest that I might miss, but the fingers cannot. The bindings, too, have their own language. A new binding resists, its leather tight, its spine creaking faintly. An old one opens like a sigh, the pages falling naturally into place. Corded sewing supports can be felt beneath the spine, each one a little ridge of tension holding centuries together. Turning a page is a ritual. The sound, the motion, the momentary pause to let the vellum settle in its new position, all are part of a tactile conversation between reader and book. To touch is to acknowledge the page's fragility, but also its endurance. Every stroke, every pigment particle, every shimmering letter rests on the surface, and the hands that turn it join a chain of contact stretching back to its maker. In the end, the touch of the page is not just a physical sensation. It is an awareness that this thing, both delicate and stubborn, has survived floods, fires, wars, and neglect, only to rest now between your hands. And for as long as you hold it, you are its keeper, bound to it by the smallest yet most intimate of gestures, the turning of a page. The page is never just white. In the dimness of the scriptorium or the filtered light of a library, it reveals its shifting nature, a surface that seems to hold its own weather. Vellum, unlike paper, has depth. Tilt it one way and the light pools in its valleys. Tilt it another and it shimmers faintly, like skin brushed by wind. Morning light makes the folios appear cool, almost bluish. as though they have stored the chill of dawn. By noon, the sun draws out warmer tones, cream, ivory, sometimes even a faint blush where the ink has oxidized into reddish brown. Candlelight changes everything. It turns the surface golden and makes the ink appear darker, almost molten, as if the words themselves were glowing from within. Illuminations respond most dramatically to light. Gold leaf, especially, is mercurial. In shadow, it can look dull, like tarnished brass. But a single beam of light makes it blaze, so bright it seems lit by some inner fire. Silver is subtler, catching light like water catches the moon, a fleeting gleam that vanishes if you shift your gaze too quickly. Even colored pigments behave like living things under light. Ultramarine deepens into velvet at certain angles, while vermilion sharpens to a red that almost hums in the air. Scholars speak of reading the page, but those who love manuscripts also speak of reading the light. A certain slant of sun might reveal faded writing invisible a moment before. A weak winter day may flatten the colors, while a bright summer morning lifts them into radiance. The texture of the vellum plays its part too. Ridges catch light, hollows hide in shadow, and a single stroke of ink can create a miniature landscape of shine and matte. In some manuscripts, light becomes an active participant. There are pages where pigments were mixed with ground glass, so that a faint sparkle lingers in the letters themselves. Others were written on purple-dyed vellum, the gold ink glowing all the more fiercely against the dark background, as though night had been given its own voice. Such effects were not merely decorative. They were part of conversation between text and illumination, between human hands and the shifting light that would one day fall upon them. To read by changing light is to read in time. A page in the morning is not the same page at dusk. Its meaning does not change, but its presence does, a reminder that these books were made for a world where reading was not constant, where illumination itself was precious, and where the turning of a page was often timed to the turning of the day. And perhaps that is the quiet magic of the manuscript. It accepts light not passively, but as a companion. Whether it is a pale gleam of winter sun, the flicker of a candle, or the sudden brightness of a skylit hall, the page takes in a moment and gives it back to you, altered, deepened, and made unforgettable. Before your eyes even settle on the text, before your hands make contact with vellum or paper, there is the scent, faint, layered, and impossible to mistake once learned. It drifts upward as soon as a manuscript is opened, as if the pages have been holding their breath for centuries and finally exhale into the room. The scent of vellum is not the scent of paper. Vellum carries a soft, animal warmth, a reminder of the skin it once was. There's a faint creaminess to it, touched with something dry and mineral, like sun-warmed stone. Age deepens it. Old vellum acquires a sweet, almost honeyed undertone, mingled with the faint musk of dust that has slept in the folds for generations. Paper, especially handmade rag paper, tells a different story. Its scent is quieter, cooler, a mingling of cloth fiber, starch, and time. If it has lived for centuries, there may be a whisper of smoke in it, the ghost of long-extinguished hearth fires. Some old papers still carry the faint salt tang of coastal air, if they were once stored near harbors. Others have absorbed the green, earthy notes of damp monasteries, where moss crept along the walls just beyond the shelves. Ink has its own part to play. Iron gall ink often leaves behind a faint metallic sharpness, mingled with the sour-sweet scent of tannins. Vermilion pigment sometimes still gives off a subtle mineral bite, as if the page is edged with the breath of stone. Gold leaf, inert as it is, carries no scent of its own, but the gesso beneath it may faintly recall chalk or glue, depending on the binder used. And then there is the library itself. The air in which the manuscript has lived becomes part of its perfume. The oak of shelves, the beeswax used to polish wood, the faint resin from a window frame, all of these seep slowly into the pages over decades, becoming inseparable from them. In some collections, a manuscript smells faintly of incense. In others, of the dry, sunlit air of reading rooms, where dust motes drift in beams of light. Handling an ancient book is like meeting someone who has traveled far and returned carrying the fragrances of every place they have been. Each whiff is a fragment of its history. The candlelit desk where it was copied, the damp winter in a stone scriptorium, the summer lay open under a bright window as a reader traced the words. Modern books are printed and bound too quickly to carry such layered scents. Their smell is often the smell of fresh ink, paper sizing, and adhesives, sharp, immediate, but without the slow accumulation of memory. A medieval manuscript, by contrast, has its centuries to breathe, absorb, and transform. To bring one close to your face is not just to smell parchment and ink. It is to inhale time itself. And so, for many who love these books, scent is not incidental. It is part of the reading, part of the ritual. Eyes may read the words, hands may feel the page, but the nose reminds you that you are holding something alive in its own way, steeped in the breath of centuries. Every manuscript speaks, not in the ink words alone, but in the subtle language of its own material presence. To listen, you must quiet yourself, slow your movements, and let your ears tune to the smallest sounds. A vellum leaf has a voice unlike any other. When turned, it sighs, a soft, drawn-out sound, like silk shifting in slow folds. Sometimes, if the air is dry, it gives a faint, crisp chill, almost like the hush of a distant tide. In damp weather, vellum becomes more supple, and its turn is quieter, a muted whisper, as if it knows not to wake the words resting upon it. Rag paper speaks differently. Its fibers produce a low rustle, gentle but earthy, like leaves stirred in a summer breeze. The sound changes subtly depending on the paper's thickness, its sizing, and its age. Some folios hum faintly as they move, their edges brushing together like a stack of soft cloths. Others have a sharper crackle, betraying the brittleness of centuries. Then there's the sound of binding. When you first open a manuscript, the spine may creak faintly, a small, dignified protest against movement after long stillness. The boards, often of seasoned oak or beech, may give a dry click when realigned. If the sewing has loosened over centuries, the gatherings shift against one another with muffled thump like a padded heartbeat. Even the act of reading aloud changes the manuscript soundscape. As your voice flows over the words, your breath stirs the edges of the page. The parchment catches it, responding with a delicate flutter. In candlelight, the sound seems amplified, woven together with a soft drip of wax and the occasional pop of a distant ember. In a silent library, the voice of the page becomes more pronounced. The faint friction of your fingertips against vellum is audible. Your sleeve brushing the margin makes a low swish. Sometimes, as you lift a leaf, another settles back into place with a sound, so quiet feels like a secret being told to no one but you. It is not only the pages that speak. Clasps closing with a measured snap, the careful slide of a manuscript back into its box, the muffled thud of its weight upon the table. All are part of its vocabulary. A seasoned curator can identify a book's size, binding style, and even condition just from hearing someone open and close it. These sounds do more than charm. They keep you anchored in the present moment, reminding you that the manuscript is a physical companion, not a ghost. Its voice is part of its living identity, just as much as its text or illumination. And in return for listening, it allows you to feel its presence not just with eyes and hands, but with the ears' attentive devotion. For the reader who truly listens, turning each page becomes a kind of duet. Your movement, its reply, a shared rhythm, centuries in the making. Taste is perhaps the most unexpected sense in the study of manuscripts, yet it is not as strange as it first appears. In the long history of the book, the mouth has been a tool for testing, identifying, and sometimes even repairing its materials. In earlier centuries, scribes and conservators often relied on their tongues to distinguish between types of parchment. Fresh vellum, especially calfskin, has a faintly sweet, almost nutty tang when moistened, a legacy of the lime and careful scraping used in its preparation. Goat or sheep parchment, by contrast, can carry a sharper, more mineral edge, sometimes with a trace of salt from the brine used in curing. While this might seem unscholarly to modern eyes, a quick lick to the fingertip, pressed against a corner, was once considered a legitimate way to wake the texture of the skin for inspection. Paper, too, had its flavors. Handmade rag paper, sizing with gelatin, retained a faint broth-like note long after its creation, a ghost of the animal glue brushed into its fibers to give it strength. Eastern papers, sized with rice starch, bore a subtler taste, bland yet clean, almost like rainwater dried into thin air. By contrast, some cheap industrial papers of the 19th century carried a bitter tang from alum and rosin, a taste that warned of their brittleness to come. Ink was another matter entirely. Iron gall ink, common in medieval manuscripts, is notoriously acidic. To taste it directly would be unwise, though accidents happen when a scribe, absent-mindedly wetting the tip of a quill, drew it from an inkwell not yet fully dry. Those who did described a sharp metallic bite, like biting into a coin. Carbon inks, made from lampblack and gum arabic, were far milder, a dusty, almost charred flavor. There were stranger occasions still. Certain manuscript repairs, especially in the 18th century, involved rice paste or wheat starch paste, both edible by nature. A restorer might dab excess paste from the brush with their tongue without a thought. Some even claimed they could judge the quality of a paste by its sweetness or sourness, a sign of whether it had fermented too far. Then there are the unintentional tastes. The faint tang of dust carried on a dry page, the bitterness of soot from a candle smoke, or the mineral note of the room itself, stone, lime wash, and time. In some libraries, centuries-old air clings to the manuscripts so thickly that, when you turn a page too close to your mouth, you catch the taste of its age before you even realize you breathed it in. To taste a manuscript is, today, more metaphor than method. Yet the stories of those who once used the tongue as a tool remind us that books have always been more than visual objects. They are artifact of every sense, and their history is written not only in words, but in the physical memories of touch, scent, sound, and, yes, even taste. It begins, as all true dreams do, without warning. You are reading by lamplight, the page beneath your fingers soft as worn linen. The script is dense, its letters curled like sleeping animals, the ink deep enough to hold a shadow. Somewhere outside the room, a clock ticks, steady, patient, like a heart that does not belong to you. You turn the page, and the motion feels heavier than it should, as if the parchment resists, reluctant to reveal what follows. The moment your eyes settle on the next passage, the words shift, not vanish, not blur, but change letter by letter, into a script you've never seen and yet instantly understand. The margins widen into corridors. The illumination at the top of the folio grows taller, brighter, until it is no longer an image but a window. Through it, a landscape of ink and gold leaf stretches into the horizon. You step forward, and the parchment flexes like a bridge. Beneath your feet, the grain of the skin becomes a path, pale and fibrous, whispering with every step. Shadows of letters rise from the ground, drifting upward like ash, each one carrying a faint sound, a syllable, a note, sometimes laughter. In the dream, you realize the book is not simply a record of events. It is a place, a layered country where every reader leaves footprints that never fade. The air smells of iron, ink, and pressed flowers. The sky is stitched from illuminated initials, and the wind turns like a thumb riffling through 1,000 unseen pages. Somewhere ahead, on a hill made from stacked folios, a figure waits. You cannot see their face, only the edge of a robe sewn from scraps of parchment. In their hand, they hold a quill longer than any sword. As you approach, they tilt their head and speak in the voice of every scribe who ever touched this book. We wrote it for you, though we did not know your name. And then the quill lowers, touching the ground, and you feel the first letter of your own name begin to form. Not in the waking world, but here, in the dream script, as if the page had been waiting centuries for your arrival. The quill moves, slowly at first, each curve deliberate, as though the ink must carve its way through time to reach you. Your name blooms across the parchment ground, each letter a doorway you could step through if you dared. The sound of it being written is unlike any noise you've heard before. Part heartbeat, part turning page, part the faint crack of ice thawing in the sun. The figure's faceless hood tilts toward you, and in that gesture you understand. This is not simply a name. It is a key. All around, the dream book's landscape stirs. Hills of stacked folios shift, valleys of curled margins deepen. Rivers of gold leaf glint in some unseen wind. The sky above, stitched from illuminated initials, begins to loosen its threads, letters tumbling free and dissolving into light. You feel a pull, gentle but inexorable, toward the place where the story's spine meets its cover. You walk. Each step grows heavier, as though the dream resists your leaving. The sounds fade, the whisper of vellum underfoot, the low murmur of unwritten words, until only the faint ticking from outside the dream remains. Ahead, a vast wall rises, the inside of the final page. It gleams like polished ivory, untouched, waiting. The robed figure stands beside it, dipping the quill one last time into a well of ink so dark it swallows the lamplight. They meet your gaze, though they have no face, and ask in a voice that is both yours and not. Shall we finish it? You do not answer. Instead, you step forward, place your palm against the smooth expanse, and feel the page turn. The motion carries you upward and outward, through the seam of the book, through the last breath of the dream, until your eyes open to the lamplight once more. The book lies before you, closed now, its cover warm under your fingertips. You think of opening it again, but something tells you it would be different now, as though it knows you have read to the very end. And somewhere far away, inside the closed and silent pages, a single word glows softly in the dark. Yours.